Coming up next on Arizona Horizon, the president of the state Senate talks about the just completed legislative session. And we'll discuss the journalistic implications of a discredited story regarding a college campus sexual assault. That's all next on Arizona Horizon.
Arizona Horizon is made possible by contributions from the Friends of Eight, members of your Arizona PBS station. Thank you.
Good evening and welcome to Arizona Horizon. I'm Ted Simons. The state legislature just finished one of the shortest sessions in decades. Governor Doug Ducey credited lawmakers for moving at what he calls the speed of business. Joining us now to talk about the session is Senate President Andy Biggs. Good to see you again.
Hi, Ted. Good
Thanks
to see you.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
We'll start generally first. Your thoughts on the session?
I think there were a lot of positives that came out of the session. I was really pleased with it. I mean, was it a perfect session? No, no session's ever perfect, but I thought you saw some cohesion there. I believe both houses worked well together. I think that the governor worked well with the legislature. I think what you saw was a fairly quick session based on the fact that people in both houses were sympathetic with the governor's intentions and his goals and his campaign promises, and I would suggest that most of us probably campaigned on things very similar to what he wanted, and so I was very pleased with it.
Fastest session in decades, as we talked about. Why so fast, and why was it so important to move bills so fast?
Well, you know, I think that I don't want this to be lost, because people now are saying, "Oh, you guys move so fast," but let me tell you, when we don't move so fast, then people say, "Gosh, you guys sure move slow. What's wrong with you guys?" I think that we moved fast because we were able to come together fairly quickly on many things. I mean, everything from some of the things that when you and I talked at the beginning of the session I thought would be very controversial, and they proved to be potentially very controversial. So things like the Uber, Lyft type of issue, the microbrewery issues. We were able to get those things done. People came together and worked on them very hard, were very focused, and so we were able to get those bills done in a manner that I perhaps, to be quite frank, was a little bit surprised at how those came together.
And yet critics will say there was little time for vetting, little time to deliberate, little time for hearing deliberation from the public.
Well, I'm trying to understand that. I mean, if you look at the bills that were passed, you have probably, I was just looking at the list of bills today, hundreds of bills passed, hundreds of bills signed by the governor. Every one of those bills had hearings where the public came and testified on. You know, this was a normal session. After we passed the budget, we went another 4+ weeks, I think, and that's kind of unusual to go past a budget 4 weeks to resolve bills, but we did. And you know, I think we got most of the bills that needed to be done completed.
But you mentioned the budget, and again, there was a lot of criticism there with just a few days between getting everything to look at and then getting it done, and a perceived rush to get that done. Again, critics will say that the reason was didn't want to hear naysayers, didn't want to hear deliberation. Let's move it, let's get it done, and you did.
Well, two things about that. I welcome criticism. I'm not perfect, and people certainly can say whatever they want to say, and some of it, if it's constructive, I think we can learn from it and improve, no doubt. But I think it's a mischaracterization to say that there were just a few days to figure out what was in that budget. The governor announced his budget in early January. We didn't pass it out for, almost 2 months after that, maybe not quite 2 months after that. The governor kept saying 99%, and I think somebody did a fact check, said, well, it was really 97.5. So almost 98% of what was in the governor's budget is what was in the budget coming out. And when I hear people say, well, I didn't read the budget, or I didn't know what was in the budget, I think, well, shame on you. I mean, the governor's budget had been out for about 2 months. We had hearings on it. We didn't suspend rules to not have committee hearings on it. It was a normal budget process. Things always accelerate in the budget anyway, but I think that what you saw was the legislative branch and the executive branch were really in tandem on it. So that's why it came out quickly.
Close, obviously. There was closeness between what the governor wanted and what eventually was passed out, but they weren't exactly the same. I mean, we could talk about university funding, which I'm sure we will in here in a second or so.
I had a feeling we might
I
get
thought
there.
I might touch on that eventually.
Okay.
But I mean, that was different. There were other things that
Sure.
were different. And again, we heard from lawmakers that say, we don't know what's going on here, and yet we're supposed to be voting on this thing before the week is over.
Yeah, and that's what I say, shame on those guys.
But what should they have done? Should they have looked at the governor's budget and said, that's exactly what we're going to be doing? Because that's not very often the case.
Well, I'll tell you what I've done, and I've been down there. This is my 13th session. I read the governor's budget every year. And I know that things are going to be different, but I want to know what the governor's proposing, whether it's Napolitano or Brewer or Ducey. I want to know what the governor's saying. That's my responsibility as a legislator. The second thing I've always done is I watch the Appropriations Committee's hearings. I want to know what's going on. I read the budget bills, and if I don't understand something, I pick up the phone and I call and I say, what's going on here? I go to the small groups that are provided by the legislative leadership and by the appropriations committees, and I'm instructed what's in there. If I don't understand something, I say, I don't understand something. And people will tell you, I was a pain in the neck. I've been in the pain in the neck. I've said, why this, why that? Explain this, explain that. I mean, it is incumbent upon us as members to do that. And that's what I would say, to a lawmaker. They know where I am, because
Sure.
I try to be very open with my members, and they can tell me I don't like this, I don't like that, or I love this, I love that, and I want to know, and we'll try to do whatever we can to make adjustments if it's possible.
But to the public, which sees the governor's budget and sees it sitting there for a couple, however long it was there, and then all of a sudden here comes a final agreement between leadership and the governor, time to vote on it, you got 3 or 4 days to do it. The public sits back and says, whoa, wait a second here, I'd like to hear more. That's valid, isn't it?
Well, I think it's a fair question, it's a fair comment, but I would say, what do you think the Appropriations Committee's hearings are for? They are for that very thing. And so you come on down, and if most people are concerned about one particular aspect of the budget, you can find that, you can look at it, and you can go down to the hearing, you can register your pro or con. Especially now, we have a system where you don't even have to be down there, and you can register your complaint or your support for something.
So you're saying those kinds of deliberations do happen, they just happen prior to leadership and the governor finally getting together, which may or may not be exactly the same.
Yes and no, because those deliberations also take place afterwards. I mean, for instance, when the governor's put out his budget, and we've always done this, we immediately set up meetings with our members so they can have them explained in small groups. Plus, we have those explained to the public in appropriations committees, so they can come in and hear what the governor's budget is. And as we go through and different departments and agencies come in and explain what they think they need or whatnot, there's opportunities for public input there as well. So I mean, there's all kinds of ways for the public to have input. Good grief, in what was it, 2009, that we were in session for all but 23 days, and I heard complaints of people saying, "Oh, we didn't know what was going on." Well, good grief, we were in session almost all year. So I mean, we're going to get it either way.
So bottom line, you don't think that process, especially the budget process, was rushed in any way?
No, I think we did a normal process. The only thing I would say, we were efficient, but I don't think it was rushed.
University funding cut $99 million. Again, that's different from what the governor wanted, and I know it's different from what lawmakers wanted. Actually, some lawmakers wanted even more. Some much less. $99 million, we just heard from the Board of Trustees, ASU's Board of Trustees. They're saying that you're ignoring the Constitution, which says nearly free as possible as far as tuition, and you're ignoring the Constitution about appropriations shall be met by taxes. How do you respond to that?
Well, let's respond to 3 things. And the first one, I think, is the picture that really needs to be laid out there. When the governor's budget proposed $75 million reduction in general fund support for the universities. And that means over about the past 5 or 6 years, roughly $325 million. and the universities have raised tuition over that same period to about $850 million. So this is kind of a red herring, I believe, on their part. The general fund support has been reduced. They have almost 2.5 times that reduction and put the burden back on their students through tuition. In turn, they are themselves redistributing some of that tuition money within their student body. So some students pay no tuition, and I'm not talking about scholar or athletic scholarships, academic or athletic scholarships. I'm talking within that in and of itself. The aspect that is important to that is, at $75 million, I don't think they were happy, but I didn't see the same level of complaint and disgruntlement that I've seen at 99. So what you're really arguing over is about $24 million of the reduction. And the reality is, ASU's biggest beef was that they didn't like the way the reduction was structured. They wanted it to be based on a formula that they had concocted, which it would have penalized U of A and NAU more than ASU, for instance. And what was done was proposed by the governor, which was in the final budget, was a straight up per footsie or full-time student equivalent reduction. So that would be point one. The second point is, where the interesting thing is, the courts have generally construed appropriations with a term as vague as nearly possible. Mm-hmm. That means it's up to the legislature. Even when we were talking about the Prop 204, if you look at the Prop 204 case, what happened is the court said, look, they don't have the money, they can't pay for it. The legislature makes that determination. So as nearly as free as possible becomes that is the interpretation of the legislature, who, by the way, we're trying to deal with $1 billion to $1.5 billion over 2 years.
But very quickly, that gets back to the legislature shall, by use of taxes, fund improvements and developments of the universities.
Yeah, that's a different provision than one that I'm just talking about right now.
You don't see a connection between the two?
No.
Why not?
Well, because first of all, we do use tax money, and we give it to the universities, and they in turn use it to build buildings or whatever they need to use for, and we let them have that flexibility. But the point is, we are taxing our citizens. They are receiving taxpayer money. That's what the funding that we give them from the general fund is taxpayer money. And so we are meeting those needs. And I think we're also meeting the constitutional obligation.
But again, the idea that because of these kinds of cuts, the long-term health of the economy and Arizona's just educating the citizens is not, when we've heard this before, is from Greg Barrett and others, it's not apparently a priority in Arizona. That's a rough message to be sending to the rest of the country when we're trying to draw business out here, isn't it?
Right, and I think it's the wrong message, and I think it's also inaccurate. Let's talk about the overall funding at ASU, I mean not ASU, but the 3 universities this next year. And let's go back 5 or 6 years. If you count funding from all sources, they have never taken a reduction in funding from all sources. And next year there'll be well over $5 billion in total funding from all sources. And the fuss that they're really upset about is that extra $24 million in reduction. And they also don't want to take contextually what we're dealing with as in an entire budget with $1 billion plus in budget and structural deficit. So what they're really fussing about is about $24 million.
Well, I think Michael Crow was fussing about the 75 to begin with, didn't he?
I don't believe he was fussing so much about the 75, and I try never to bring in my private conversations with Michael Crow.
Just the formula, just the formula.
He was mostly beefed at the formula at the beginning, but then when the additional 24 came out and he couldn't get the formula changed, that's when he went ballistic.
Before you go, I know the corporate tax cuts are hitting in July, $112 million, I believe, the first go around here. When do we hit the point of diminishing returns with this? Again, we've had financial people on here. Colorado's going gangbusters. Nevada's got a good thing going there. California, despite rumors of its demise, just keeps on churning. And we are not performing up to our past levels or their levels. When are we going to see results from these kinds of tax cuts?
Well, let's talk about, because what you just asked what I call a compound question,
Yes, I
and
did.
I've got time for a simple answer.
Okay, well,
So the first part is this: you're talking about the overall economy, and I agree with you. We're not where we want to be, and we're not where we ought to be. But two things happened. We got hit on a per capita basis far more than any other state, even California. On a per capita basis, we got hit harder than any other state in the country. Number two, traditionally what has led us out of our economic problems in a normal business cycle, or even in kind of a grander recession, has been construction, home building and construction. Well, we had saturated the market because what had happened was the impetus for the Grand Recession was a housing bubble. Well, when your economy has been traditionally dependent on housing, and you hit a housing bubble, you really take it on the chin. And we had a surplus of housing that is just, well, we had hoped that by the end of last year it would finally be that the surplus, that the inventory of housing would finally be meeting level with the demand. But what we see, though, is when people couldn't afford to be in their housing, we had so many foreclosures, they changed their lifestyles. Many of them went to living in apartments and rental units. So our drive for single-family dwellings is still not anywhere near enough to drive our rebound in the economy. So that's a big problem. The corporate income tax is Arizona's is one of the on a percentage of our overall income is, I think it's below 10% of our total revenue anyway for general fund revenue. So it's fairly on the low end of our totem pole, so to speak.
we have about 30 seconds left.
Okay.
This will not be a compound question.
Okay.
Do you feel that there is a disconnect between the legislature and the people you serve?
No, I really don't. And let me explain why. Governor Ducey campaigned on a balanced budget, and he said he would do what he would do. He said we'd make hard decisions the first year in order to lay a foundation going forward. Most of the people who ran in the Republican Party, who also won and are the majority party, ran those same things. And I think there's a vocal group of people who mischaracterize what happened in the budget, who are out there trying to mischaracterize and stir trouble up because they feel like they didn't get what they wanted in the budget. But in the end, I think you would find if we went out and we talked to people and we had, ours is not a 30-second message, ours is a 30-minute message. But if we explained it to people, I think people would say, you did what you said you'd do. You promised us you would do it. You did it. We are with you.
President Andy Biggs, good to see you again. Thanks for joining
Good to see you,
us. We
Ted.
appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks.
The Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism released a report this week that ripped into a Rolling Stone article about the alleged fraternity sexual assault of a University of Virginia female student. The review blasted the magazine for ignoring basic rules of reporting. Here to talk about the article and the report is Tim McGuire, the Frank Russell Chair for the Business of Journalism professor at ASU's Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication. Good to see you again. Thanks for
Good to
joining
see
me.
you, Ted.
Hey, this Rolling Stone report, what exactly did Rolling Stone report?
They reported that a woman named Jackie was raped in a violent manner by a fraternity or pledges to a fraternity, and it was set up by a guy who was allegedly from the fraternity and asked her out on a date.
And how did this story unravel?
It unraveled primarily with the reporting of the Washington Post and a few others who made some of the basic checks that you would make in this kind of story that Rolling Stone simply failed to make. They did not show that these people existed. They did not corroborate anything that was being said. They totally lacked skepticism, and that's what the report says.
Sources never vetted, the student's story never confirmed. This alleged ringleader, there was a pseudonym used, they never found, we don't even know if this person exists.
No, in fact, there's heavy evidence he does not.
What happened here?
Again, I think skepticism was suspended. I think there was way too much empathy. I think that Rolling Stone was protecting its story. If you find out too much, the story is going to blow up. And this was a weak story that relied on a pseudonym, which is always dangerous. Nobody really seemed to know who people were in the story. The editors let the reporter get away with things that I've never seen a newsroom do. It's an extremely disappointing case. We've been using it, ethics teachers, Peter Body and Rick Rodriguez and myself at the Cronkite School have been using this case for the last several months as an example of what you don't do, and we've talked about the fact that there are consequences. The terrifically disturbing thing here is there are no consequences.
No one's been fired.
No one's been fired. No one's been disciplined in any way. It's simply amazing. It's terribly disappointing. And, we're sitting there saying, well, maybe there aren't any consequences for this kind of horrible journalistic behavior.
You mentioned empathy early on. The fact that this was a story involving a rape victim, how does that play in? That's touchy stuff.
Oh yeah, it always is, and I've for a long time said in an active rape case we should not name victims or what some people call accusers. However, when you're doing a narrative a year or two after, and you're using pseudonyms, you really need to at least produce the person for editors. And there's no sign that that was done here. And I do believe that this Jackie, alleged Jackie, ran too much of the show. The reporter, if you read the reporter and the editors were desperately afraid they were going to lose the story,
right,
that she would pull out. Well, at any time, I made the point to Senate President Biggs that any time in politics or journalism or trucking, if somebody owns you, if you're totally dependent on one person, you probably better run. And that's definitely what happened in this case.
In this case, we got just a couple of minutes left here, but this is fascinating stuff, but it's also, makes you wonder, is this something that is could this have happened 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago? Will it more likely happen in the coming years?
Well, I think we have to factor Rolling Stone into this. Rolling Stone has always prided itself on being out on the edge. Its history has been to push the envelope. And so this may be a repeat of that. At Rolling Stone, it might have happened 10, 15, 20 years ago. I don't think at most responsible newsrooms it would, and I don't think this is indicative of what's happening in newsrooms. Certainly there are reduced resources, reporting is more difficult, but the basic touching of bases of, does this person exist? Is this story corroborated? Have I followed up with the witnesses? None of those things were done here, and I think that's unique to this case.
And the push to be first, the push to have the big story, sometimes you just have to sit on it.
And in this case, they were just too desperately afraid to lose the story. And I think it put them into a hopeless box. But we still have the situation, editors and reporters were in a box, and there are absolutely no
Yeah,
consequences.
the consequences, you think
No
that's going to change? You think something's going to happen here?
Well, the big theory is that they're protecting themselves on a lawsuit. I actually think that mitigating by punishing someone would help them in a lawsuit, but
Yeah.
that's just my opinion.
All right. Good to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much. Good to see you again.
Thursday on Arizona Horizon, ASU physicist Lawrence Krauss updates the latest science news, including the restart of the Large Hadron Collider, and we'll hear about a new book on Arizona's first governor. That's at 5:30 and 10 on the next Arizona Horizon. That is it for now. I'm Ted Simons. Thank you so much for joining us. You have a great evening.
Arizona Horizon is made possible by contributions from the Friends of 8, members of your Arizona PBS station. Thank you.